Hi, I'm Emily and welcome to episode 10 of the Pepper Knits Knitting Podcast. I'm a knitter based in Perth in Western Australia, so thank you for joining me for another episode. It's been quite a while since I last filmed. Life has been quite busy, but not too busy to be knitting, so I still have plenty of things that I want to share today. I'll briefly discuss what I'm wearing. This is my Cognac sweater. It is a design by Merino, also known as Atelier Castin, and I test knit this for her at the start of the year, and it's finally getting cool enough that I can begin to wear it a little bit. I do have to have the sleeves rolled up because it's not that cold, but because it's knit at such a loose gauge, it is quite an airy sweater, and I find that I reach for this a lot more when it's a little bit cool, but it's not quite cold enough to wear a big jumper. So I knit this in a strand of the fur coat colorway from Wool & Works Barbie collection, and I had 2 skeins on the Merino base, and I held it with a strand of Fyberspates Cumulus in the natural or the beige off-white color. And I really like how you can still see all of the beautiful colors and the depth of color and the speckles in the main strand, but obviously you have the nice halo and the fluff that fills in the gaps because it is knit at quite a loose gauge. I'll talk more about this design later in the episode, as I do have another one on the needles. First, let's jump into my finished objects. I have 2 pairs of socks that I wanted to share. I found that socks have been some easy knitting that are quite portable. I've been quite busy, so they come around with me everywhere and also don't take up a lot of brain space. The main whip that I've been working on that is almost finished has been quite challenging, so it's good that I've had socks to work on when I just wanted to knit something plain. So the first pair of socks are my Mudo socks, and this is a pattern by the Petite knitter, and I knit these in the recommended yarn, which is the Bûches Petite Lambswool, and I knit them in the colors medium grey brown and off-white. So I knit the 64 stitch size for these socks. Usually for vanilla socks, I will knit 56 stitches on 2.25mm needles, but for colour work, because obviously you have the floats in there, it makes it less stretchy, and I do tend to knit tighter, especially when I'm knitting magic loop for socks. I always go up to a 64 stitch at least. They are a little bit tight, so if you're someone who doesn't like to have tight socks, maybe size up again in these, but I don't mind. I prefer socks to be a little bit more snug rather than falling down. I also haven't really properly worn these yet, so I do expect that they might stretch and grow a little bit as I start wearing them. I did make a few small modifications to the pattern for these socks. So as you can see, the ribbing is quite short, and this is lengthened a little bit more than what's in the pattern. I have a feeling the pattern only says 1 centimeter of rib, and I might have done 1.5 or 2 centimeters. I definitely added a little bit more, and I probably could have gone even more again. Someone else who was knitting these socks at the same time as me did a proper full-length cuff, and that looked really good as well. And I think it probably makes them a little bit more practical because you have that stretch that will fit a bit more snugly on your ankle. I also added a little bit of length into the leg of the sock as well. I think I added 1 of these extra repeats at the bottom. I think the pattern, and in the sample photos you can see it only has the 4 of these before the heel, but I did add an extra one just to give myself a little bit of extra room in the leg. They're definitely still quite short socks, but they're definitely comfortable to wear. I am glad that I added that extra one in. Again, I think the person who I was knitting these with, as well as lengthening the cuff, she also added quite a few extra repeats in the leg. I think she might have added an extra row in as well. I do have quite a bit of yarn left over from these socks. I'm not sure if it's enough to make another pair. I haven't weighed it yet, but maybe if I didn't add the extra room into the leg and the cuff, I might have enough. But I do want to keep some extra yarn on hand because I am a little bit worried about getting holes in these socks. The Petite Lambswool is 100% lamb's wool. There's no nylon or anything else to add a bit of extra strength when making socks, which I was a little bit worried about when I started to make them. It does feel like quite a sturdy yarn. It's not rustic, like it's not scratchy or anything at all, but it's definitely not as smooth and soft as a superwash merino feels. So as I was saying, I do want to keep some extra yarn on hand in case I need to mend these. I am quite worried that the heel might develop holes quite quickly. This is a afterthought heel, which I think is quite standard for colourwork socks and definitely for the Petite knitter. Both of the colourwork socks that I've knit from her have had the same heel, where you insert the scrap yarn and then go back afterwards, take out the yarn and do the heel. So there's no slip stitch heel flap or anything adding extra strength where you might need it the most. I'll just have to see how these go, and if I do get holes in them, I guess I will have to learn how to repair socks. Next up we have my other pair of socks which I have finished, and these are some DK weight vanilla socks. This is a pattern that I have used quite a few times. I've made quite a few pairs of DK socks in the past year or so. I find that they make really good gifts. So the pattern that I use for this is called the DK weight vanilla sock pattern by the Crazy Sock Lady. I'm fairly sure it's a free pattern. It's quite simple and it's just a standard vanilla sock knit at a DK weight gauge. So as for all of the DK weight socks that I have made, I always hold a strand of fingering weight yarn with a strand of silk mohair, and I really like the halo that the mohair gives. I have a ton of scraps of Drops Kid Silk, and I've used the colour white for these socks. For the main strand, I use the Penguin Road Yarns 4-ply sock yarn in the colour Jasmine. I've only ever bought Penguin Road yarns from markets. They're a local Perth dyer. I don't know if they have an Etsy shop or a shop front or anything like that, but they do have some really beautiful colourways. I really like the bright neon speckles in this yarn. I am not usually a neon kind of person, but I think because it's on a white base and they're fairly sparse speckles, like they're not all grouped together, I think it gives a really nice effect. But these socks are not for me. They are a gift for my sister-in-law for her birthday. I know that I can make a pair of DK socks fairly quickly, and it is a nice palette cleanser or a nice satisfying project that I can work on, that I know I will get that instant gratification and the feeling of a finished object without investing weeks and weeks of work. For this pair, I knit the 40 stitch size on the 3.25mm needles, which is what's recommended in the pattern, but I do think my gauge comes up a little bit loose. I do knit them on magic loop, but I think because I knit them on metal needles and both the superwash merino and the mohair are quite slippery, I think it makes my gauge a little bit loose. So I've always been able to get away with knitting the smaller size in the pattern, even for people who don't necessarily have really narrow feet or ankles. But again, they are also quite stretchy. Because my gauge is a little bit loose, they do stretch out quite well. When I've tried them on myself, they are a little bit big, but I do have super narrow feet and ankles, so I'm hoping that these will fit someone with slightly wider feet. But then again, I don't think they're going to be socks that will get worn in shoes or anything, because they are a little bit thicker. They'll be more like house socks or slippers. I pretty much followed the pattern exactly. I did the 2x2 rib cuff. I did the same amount of rows for the leg, and then I did the same wedge toe as well, but I did do a different heel. In the pattern, there are instructions for a heel flap and gusset, which I do really like. I like the fit of, I like how it looks, and I don't mind knitting it up. But mainly when I'm knitting DK socks, I am using very limited amounts of the scrap yarn of the main colour. So I've always just substituted a German short row heel, which I kind of just fudge it most of the time. I do think it looks okay. It's a little bit pointy and doesn't sit exactly flat, but when it's on my foot at least, it fits okay, so I'm hoping that it will be okay. The main reason that I substitute a German short row heel is just because it uses less yarn than a heel flap and gusset, and like I said, I'm usually using very limited amount of scrap yarn for these socks, so that's pretty much the only reason. I think for this one, because I had the whole skein, I could have easily done the heel flap and gusset, but it was just something that I guess is habit for me to do now, and I think it does look a bit more like a commercial sock. There are a few holes in this one. I think it's just my loose gauge again. I think if I was going to make more pairs of these, I might consider going down to a 3mm needle. I do have quite a bit of the 4-ply sock yarn left over. I am thinking I might make a pair of shorty socks or the skimmer socks even. The skimmer socks are like those invisible socks, and when I first heard the pattern I was really hesitant. I really didn't think that it was a good idea, but I've heard more than one person tell me that they are good invisible socks and they do stay up on your foot, so I'm thinking I might give them a go. So those are my two finished objects. Let's jump into my works in progress. And the first work in progress I want to share is one that's almost done. The knitting is all done now. I just have the finishing touches to add, and that is the Daisy sweater. This is a compound raglan sweater designed by Solvara from Solvara Knitwear, who I'm fairly sure is quite a new designer, but I really love all of her designs. So I am knitting this in the recommended yarn, which is the Isager Tvinni yarn, and I'm using the color 0, which is the white, and also the color 19, which is this hot pink color. I'm not sure how accurate it is coming up on the screen. I am knitting this in the size 2 on 3.5mm needles. I think the pattern recommends 4.5mm needles, but when I knit up my swatch, I just didn't like how the fabric looked. After I blocked it, it was quite loose, and I think I was quite off gauge as well. Because it is a fingering weight yarn, I didn't want it to look too see-through, especially with the amount of floats that are happening in this design. So that is the swatch that I did on 4.5mm needles, and then this is the finished fabric that is blocked on 3.5. So I'm not sure how well you can see, but the stitches are just a little bit tighter, and I think it'll look a little bit neater as well. You can definitely still see the floats in the background, but I knew that was going to be inevitable no matter what I did. I think it just makes the fabric look a little bit more even as well. So as I said, I have finished all of the knitting for this sweater. I have blocked the body and this sleeve, but I haven't yet blocked this sleeve. So as you can see, it is fairly short compared to the blocked one. I did have to quite aggressively block this sleeve to get it to the length that it is, and you can probably see that the motif is quite stretched out compared to the body. I'm not sure how I feel about that yet. I think I'll just block the other sleeve and then see how I feel about it. I just don't think that I needed a whole extra repeat of the color work on the sleeve. I just knit the ribbing as specified in the pattern, but I think if I do find that the sleeves are too short and it's annoying me, I will go back and just add a little bit more of the ribbing instead. This did make an appearance in my last episode, and I think I was speaking about how I found the whole yoke situation to be quite challenging with figuring out all the colorwork placements, doing the raglan increases, and the Japanese short rows all in one. It was just a lot for my little brain to handle, but I'm really proud of myself for persevering through, because once I'd finished the yoke and split for sleeves, the rest was really easy. Obviously the body is just straight, there's no shaping. There are some gentle decreases and a nice taper to the sleeve, but I find that doing decreases in colorwork is so much easier because you don't have to think about what color the increase needs to be. You're just doing a decrease and it doesn't matter so much. So yeah, it's been quite easy since then. I did make a few mistakes in the front of it, which aren't super obvious, but I know that they're there, I think, because as soon as I did them, I was like, I don't love how that looks, but I think I'm not going back to rip it out, and I think I can probably fix it with a little bit of duplicate stitching or just sewing up some of the areas. So I think what happened was I miscounted how many stitches were in between these two motifs, and I had too many stitches. So I think I caught it early enough that I could tink back and knit back up the correct color so they matched up in the proper area. And I think I also put in some decreases here and some extra raglans here just so I could shift everything to be aligned properly. Not that it's very obvious, I don't think you can really tell when it's on. There's just a few holes up around here as well, and like here this doesn't exactly sit flat. There's also, I think here you can probably see that it's a big hole right there, and I think the same thing is on this side, but it's not quite as noticeable. I think what happened there was this is where the short rows were moving, like as in you did the turn, and I should have caught a float here, and I thought about it at the time, and there was too much going on in my brain, so that just didn't happen. And obviously now I wish that I had caught a float there and made sure that I'd caught the white around, and I think that would have avoided that. But honestly, it's not a big deal. I think you're not really looking at that. There's so much more going on in this sweater with the bright colors that it's not really something that draws your eye anyway. I also mentioned that I think I was struggling with joining the colorwork in the round, or I think I just started the body, but I was a little bit annoyed at how the colorwork didn't match up in the round. When I'd gone back and read the pattern, there were instructions on how to shift the back colorwork so that it was a bit off center, but then that meant that you would line up on the sides of the body. And I'm actually quite glad that I didn't do that and I didn't understand what it was saying, so I just went and centered everything in the back. And someone else also left a comment to say they would have done the same thing. That would have annoyed them if the colorwork was off center, and at least the sides are symmetrical anyway, so everything looks symmetrical and even, which I think I'm actually quite glad that it ended up like that anyway. Quickly, here is the back, so you can see that the colorwork is aligned in the center, and the same at the front as well. And then in the sides, essentially you just add in some stitches here. When you cast these ones on, you just knit these all in the main color, which goes all the way down. That brings me into the only modification I made in this pattern. It's not even really a modification, but essentially I just decided to mimic the same stitches that run down the side and go into the sleeve as well. So the instructions for the sleeve just have you basically doing the decreases right next to each other, and then you don't have this line of main color stitches running down the bottom of the sleeve. But I thought because I had done it for the side, it would look better if this was the same all the way down and it just is a continuous line that runs down. I think as well with the two raglan stitches here, it looks quite even, it doesn't look unusual. And I think it just breaks up the colorwork as well. For example, if these were right next to each other, it would have looked like one huge flower, especially considering they both have the yellow centers. I just don't think I would have liked how it looks so much, so I'm quite glad with my decision to do that as well. The one thing that I am a little bit concerned about is the collar. I'm not sure how well you can see that it is sticking out a little bit, and I don't know if that's how I blocked it, if it was my tension, or if I need to put in some elastic. I'm also thinking maybe it's part of the design. There weren't a huge amount of short rows, and I'm kind of thinking that because I can feel that it's quite high up here and it feels like a boat neck, like it's kind of trying to pull up quite a lot on my neck. So I'm thinking that maybe there's just not enough short rows to lift the back, and also maybe the short rows are too far apart from each other, as in you're knitting too many stitches past the last short row so that it's not creating quite a nice curve. I think I would have preferred a little bit deeper, but I think I can maybe fix that with blocking. When I next block this to block the next sleeve, I might just try and block this a little bit flatter and maybe a little bit deeper. I'm not sure how much that will work because obviously there's not much give in the main fabric with all these floats in the back. But yeah, it is a little bit annoying and I don't really like how it's sticking up. I could also try adding in some elastic maybe. I don't necessarily want it tighter, especially here because it is like sitting quite up against my throat, so I don't really want that to be tight. I mainly just want the sides to sit a little bit flatter, so I'll have to report back on how I go with fixing that. So now that I finished all the knitting, there's two things left to do. I do need to weave in all of my ends. I haven't even started that yet, but I don't think it would take too long. There's not too many. And I also need to finish adding in all of the yellow centers. So the yellow is not knit in the Isager Tvinni yarn, although I think they did have a bright yellow color, and I knew that I wanted to have bright yellow because that was what was in the original sample design, and I just think it would be the obvious choice. I couldn't think of any other color that I would want in the middle. I was a bit hesitant to buy a whole 100-gram skein of the Tvinni in yellow because I didn't really know what else I was going to do with some bright yellow yarn. It's also not the most inexpensive or affordable yarn. I do have to order it from interstate and I have to pay for postage, and I already paid a lot to get this yarn because I had to send some yarn back and then get the pink color, and I had to pay twice the amount of postage for that, which was a little bit annoying, but I'm glad that I did because I do really like the color of it. So yeah, I was a little bit hesitant to buy an extra skein as well, so I did go to my local yarn store in Fremantle, which is called Yarns on Collie, and I found the perfect yellow to add into the center. So I think this is tapestry wool. I have never used this before. I mainly bought this for the color and also because it feels very similar to the main yarn as well. It's quite a similar thickness. If anything, it's a tiny bit thinner, but I think that's quite a good thing because it is duplicate stitching on top of the fabric. So I think if it was any thicker than the main yarn, it would have looked quite bulky and a little bit messy. So I think this was a perfect find. I did buy 2 of these and they were $3 each. So to get 50 meters of yarn for $6 is a little bit more pricey, but then it's only $6. I'm just glad that I won't have heaps of leftover yarn. So I'm quite glad that I found that because now I know if in the future I ever want just a small amount of wool in a particular color for doing duplicate stitching, or I only need a tiny amount for color work and I don't want to buy a whole skein, that is quite a viable option. They had so many colors. They had a couple of different brands as well, so there was a lot of colors to choose from. I think they had about 4 or 5 different yellow options, and I finally found the exact shade that I wanted. They also had some more mustardy yellows, a paler yellow, and I was tossing up between them all, but I'm really happy with my final choice. So I've just slowly been working on the duplicate stitching. I think I've done all the front and all of the right sleeve, and I've started on the back and some of this sleeve where I've blocked it. I just want to finish blocking this first. I think I'd rather duplicate stitch over blocked fabric because there is quite a difference in the blocked and unblocked fabrics. Hopefully you can tell that this is quite uneven. It's definitely not messy. I think my color work tension has actually been really even and good for this project, which is something that I have been working on, but it's definitely a lot more flat and smooth in the blocked fabric. And I thought that would just make it a bit easier to duplicate stitch over as well. And then I know that that's the finished fabric and how it will sit when I'm duplicate stitching, rather than doing it on the unblocked fabric, which then will obviously shift and grow, especially on the sleeve, because I'm gonna have to aggressively block that a little bit extra long as well. So probably this afternoon I might give this a block whilst it's still warm enough for things to dry fairly quickly, and then I can finish doing the duplicate stitch. I thought that doing the yellow centers would take forever and it would be really tedious, but I'm actually enjoying it quite a lot. I'm just doing little bits here and there, mainly during the day because it's quite hard to see the contrast of the yellow and the white in the evening when I have artificial lighting. So I'm just doing a little bit here and there and I'm quite enjoying it actually. It's nice to do something a little bit different other than knitting if I don't feel like it. So hopefully this will be a finished object in the next episode. This is how much yarn I have left over from the sweater now that all the knitting is done. I did weigh it, but I can't remember how much there was. There wasn't a huge amount, so I'm not sure if I would really be able to do a full project with both of these. But again, I'll just keep them in my scrap yarn stashed until I finally start a scrappy project. I'm thinking I do want to make the Sweet Shop blanket by Laura Penrose, but the main thing stopping me from doing that is purchasing and finding a main color yarn to tie everything in together. I think I do want to do something similar to her with a natural or cream base, but I just need to find something that is cost effective. So for now, these will probably go into that bag of scraps that I'm collecting to eventually start a Sweet Shop blanket. Hello, it's the next day now. I ran out of time to finish talking about all of my whips yesterday. I had lunch scheduled with a friend and then the rest of the day just got away from me, but I'm back today to finish discussing my last 2 whips. So I got up to my Cognac sweater and this is where I'm up to so far on the sweater. So as you can see, I have finished the yoke, bound off the body, and I'm just starting on one of the sleeves. Now I haven't done very much on it. And instead of the twisted rib for this one, I wanted to do the I-cord finishing. I really love the round neckline of this sweater. The shaping with short rows just makes for the perfect rounded neck. I'll talk about the yarn that I'm using for this one first. So I'm holding these 2 strands held together. This is the Studio Donegal Darnie yarn in this really nice grey colour, and I really love all of the tweedy speckles that you can see in there. There's some blues, some browns, orangey colours, and then some darker grey black bits as well. And this is 100% lambswool, so it's not a really soft, smooth superwash merino feeling. It's definitely a rougher yarn. It's not scratchy. I don't find it itchy or anything against my skin, and I can be a little bit sensitive, So I wanted a second strand that would really complement that and not have a really fluffy, smooth silk mohair or something that would completely mask the whole texture of the main strand. So that is why I decided to go for this one, and this is the CaMaRose Midnatssol yarn, which is a blend of baby alpaca, tencel, and there's also some wool content in there, and I really think the wool content is what brings it together and doesn't have such a fluffy halo like a silk mohair or a silk alpaca or suri alpaca would have. I'm really happy with my decision on those two yarns held together. The main strand did bloom quite a lot with blocking. I've blocked the whole body, so all of this fabric is blocked, but it bloomed quite a lot, so I'm not sure if I definitely needed the second strand, but I do like the lighter core in the second strand, and I think it adds a little bit more dimension into the fabric. So I think it was worth having it in there, and there is a little bit of a halo. So here is the sweater on. I'm knitting the size 2 as well for this version, and I'm knitting again on 5.5mm needles. The pattern recommends 6, but I've had to size down for both versions to get gauge. I did mention that I've already blocked this so far. I am a little bit worried about running out of the second strand. I bought 3 balls of this, which should technically be enough, and looking at it now, I think we might be okay. I used pretty much 1 ball to do the yoke, which is quite a big circumference as you're going around, and you do have to do all the increases for the sleeves here. I just about had to break into the 3rd ball to finish off the body, but I really didn't want this to be too cropped. It is designed to be quite a cropped fit anyway, but because I'm doing the I-cord finishing, I would rather have shorter sleeves than an extra cropped body. I'll stand up and show where the body is sitting at the moment. So it is a little bit on the cropped side. It's definitely a length that I'm comfortable with. These are quite high-waisted shorts, and it's definitely covering all of the waistband. So I'm pretty much sitting at the length from the underarm that's recommended in the pattern, and I think I did the same for my first version, and I have a lot of other sweaters that are this length that I like to wear as well. It is quite a boxy fit, and I think the I-cord is not flaring out, but it's definitely not cinching in like a ribbing would. So if that is something that I do find that I want to change, I can always go back and size down a needle size just to do the I-cord. I did just use the same 5.5mm needle for the I-cord edges. So I did cast this on as a little bit of a breather from my daisy sweater, because funnily enough, sometimes I don't feel like working on all over colourwork fingering weight sweater, and this does work up quite quickly because of the loose gauge, so it was nice to have a quick moving stockinette project to have as an alternative to my daisy sweater. And as you can see, I have gotten quite a lot done. I haven't really been working on this very monogamously, so it's nice to have this going in the background. The sleeves on my first version are quite long. I do have, I guess, kind of long arms, but I did find that the sleeves did go quite far past my wrist. I think they kind of ended about here on my first version, and I think a lot of the tester feedback was that the sleeves were quite long as well. So I think, considering that, I should be okay to just use the rest of this ball of the second strand and hope that my sleeves are a good length. Again, I don't mind too much if they're a little bit shorter. I think with the I-cord edges and this being a bit more of a blouse, it won't look funny if the sleeves like cut off a little bit before my wrist, like around here I would be happy with. I've also found that this does stretch a little bit with blocking. It obviously doesn't grow like a superwash yarn, but I found that I could manipulate the body quite easily just to get a couple of extra centimeters out of it. So I'm not too worried about that. There's also not a huge amount of positive ease in the sleeves. I do have the correct meterage that is recommended in the pattern for the second strand, but it is a little bit on the thicker side than a normal silk mohair would be. The yarn that is used in Marine's version, I think, is the tin silk mohair, so I assume that is a little bit thinner. So it could be why I'm finding that I'm running out of yarn a little bit quicker. I do find that the neckline is also sitting quite wide, the same as my first version, but I think because the ribbing obviously went in a little bit more because it's longer than the I-cord is, that closed itself up a little bit more. Because it's such an airy fabric, I'm not going to want to wear this on really cold days where I want this part of me to be covered. I'm really enjoying working on this one. It's nice to have this slowly going along in the background. There's no rush for me to finish it, although I would like to be able to wear it sooner rather than later because I just love the design and the fabric is really nice and soft. I think the colour will fit really well into my wardrobe, and I think I'll be able to wear it casually and also dress it up to be more suitable for workwear as well. The other great thing about the Cognac sweater is that it has very low yarn requirements. So I mentioned I only had 3 balls of the Midnatssol, and that should hopefully be enough. I also only needed to purchase 2 skeins of the Darnie yarn. So it's really a good way to use up if you have 2 special skeins of fingering weight yarn. You can definitely get a sweater's quantity easily out of that. I'm not worried about running out of the Darnie yarn. I think I'll have plenty of that. So hopefully I have just enough of the second strand as well. My final work in progress is another pair of socks and also a gift knit. And I'm making these rib socks for my dad for his birthday. His birthday's in a couple of weeks, so I should definitely have time to get these done. As you can see, I finished the first sock and I'm about halfway through, just over halfway through the leg on the second sock. I have knit this pattern for him before and he requested a second pair with very specific dimensions for the leg and how he wanted everything to fit. He wanted something super stretchy at the cuff, so hopefully this is stretchy enough for him. I'm using a free pattern that I found on Ravelry. It is called the Basic Rib Sock by Wise Hilda, and I'm making the largest size in the pattern again, and this one I am following the pattern pretty much exactly. The yarn I'm using for this is the Fiddlesticks Socks yarn, which is a very standard 75% superwash wool and 25% nylon yarn, and it's just a color number. There's no name for the color. There is a picture that that's how the sock is meant to look, which to me looks very self-striping, and I guess I kind of get that in the sock, but they're definitely not very pronounced stripes. Maybe it's because it's on the ribbing, but then even on the sole of the foot that is stuck in it, I'm not getting so much of the distinct stripes. I did say that I'm knitting this exactly to pattern, but I'm fairly sure I've gone down a needle size. I'm knitting these on my small 2.25mm chow goose, and I think the pattern is written for 2.5mm needles, but I just find my gauge with 2.5mm needles and fingering weight for socks is just a little bit too loose. And I want these to be quite hard wearing because I think my dad does wear them into boots. So I thought just going down a needle size would create a slightly tighter and denser fabric. But it does feel like quite a sturdy yarn. Like it doesn't feel like it's gonna get holes in it too easily. It's a little bit rougher and a little bit of more of a rustic yarn, even though it is superwash. So they should hopefully stand the test of time and not get holes in them too quickly. Saying that, the heel flap is just knit in stockinette. You probably can't tell too much with this variegated yarn, but there's no slip stitches or anything to add a bit of extra durability here. And I'm kind of wishing that I did put in a slip stitch heel flap. I think the first pair that I made for him, I did do that, but I also made that in a lot more of a smoother superwash merino. So I'm hoping that this yarn will hold up well enough. It looks like I'm going to have plenty left over, so again, if the worst happens and these do get holes in them, I can always go back and mend them. In the little introduction part of this pattern, it does say that the purpose behind this pattern is that the designer wanted like a good fitting sock in terms of having something stretchy and ribbed, but also a good knitting experience, and that you don't have to purl so much. And I do find that both of those things are true because it is a 3x1 rib sock. I think you have plenty of stretch for it to fit quite a wide variety of foot sizes as well. And my dad doesn't have particularly large ankles, but he was finding that as he was wearing commercial socks all day, they would just get too tight into the afternoon and they would pretty much cut off his circulation. So he wanted something like with a really stretchy cuff, and I did a German twisted cast on for that extra bit of stretch and just went straight into the 3x1 rib. I think the last pair I made for him, I did a 1x1 cuff at the top, and I haven't heard him complain about those, but I just thought, seeing as he specified he wants them to be super stretchy, I'll stick to the pattern and just go straight into the 3x1 rib. And I think it looks okay. I did initially think it looked a little bit funny, but with this yarn, I think it looks quite good. I find that the first sock always goes so quickly, and then I stall a lot on the second sock. But I think having a deadline for these is definitely helping. And once I'm past the leg and then I go through the heel flap and gusset, usually I find that the rest of the sock goes by fairly quickly. So that brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you very much for sticking through to the end. I hope you found it a little bit interesting or inspiring, and I'd be interested to hear what you're working on as well. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you then in the next episode. Bye!